Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special summer edition of Together in Hope, the Paulist Fathers Office of Ecumenical and Multi-Faith Relations, email, newsletter, and I'm the director of the office, Father James DiLuzio. It is my pleasure today to offer you this interview with Mr. Nicolas Markell. Nicolas is an iconographer and a religious arts specialist. He's working on some new projects, and I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to introduce him to you, all of our subscribers. Nicolas has a studio, Markell Studios, in Stillwater, Minnesota, and I will be providing a variety of links for you to access his website and some of the projects that he is working on. So welcome, Nicolas.
Thank you, Father James. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you with us. Nicolas is a longtime friend. We were both in the Paulist Seminary for several years. I moved into ordination, moved into marriage. His wonderful wife, Signe, has two kids. One's getting married in a year or so. We've gotten much older. But Nicolas, let's get down to what we'd like you to share with our readers. And the first is simply, in your life, what got you so interested in art and to pursue art as a profession?
Well, in my case, I think it was always there from the beginning. If I remember my interest in the arts, I think we're all.
Kindergarten? Were you drawing in
Oh
kindergarten?
yes, oh definitely drawing in kindergarten. Spent a lot of my time doing that. My one thing that influenced me was my dad had died when I was young. I was 16 months old, and so my mom raised five kids. Her mom came to live with us to help out. But one way that my mom would relax, and she wouldn't go out, on the town and things of that sort, or evenings out, but she would do artwork. She would set up her easel in our living room, and she would paint. And so a lot of the materials were around. A lot of the experience of that was around for me, and so I think that influenced me a lot. She was very open and free with us, using her materials and expressing ourselves artistically. And so I think that had a huge impact on me. I remember, in terms of the art I do now, religious art, I remember we had a store in town. I believe it was a music store. But down on the lower level, they had one of those revolving cases that have jewelry and kinds of devotional items. And I'd had a lot of religious medals and things. And I remember I would spend, it seemed to be hours rotating that case with all the different medals in it and just looking at the crosses and the medals and the different jewelry and things that were in it. And I felt very captivated by that. Like this was something that I thought I might want to do in my life. So I would spend a lot of my time doing artistic pursuits when I was young.
Wow. About how old were you at the time of admiring the religious art and the
I
jewelry?
probably was, I would say maybe 8 to 10 years old or something of that sort,
Really
and yeah,
formative years.
I think so. I think back to all that, and it's important. I think that there's some kind of interest. I think a lot of people have artistic interests, but for various reasons in their lives, they don't pursue it. Maybe
Mm.
they wait until they're much older to pursue it or something. It's unfortunately seen as not always practical. But I think in my case, that was always encouraged. And so there was never a time that I wasn't really interested in art or thought I would go in that direction. Now, when I graduated from high school, I thought I would go into art education. I went to the what's now the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. But during that time, I got interested in graphics and publication and kind of more the commercial end of things. I thought that was a real fit for me, but also pursued the fine arts. So my degree was actually fine art with a focus on painting. And so it was always there from the beginning, and I pursued that. And I was in worked in commercial art for a little bit before I entered religious life. I felt a calling to that as well and entered religious life. In fact, my interest in the Paulists was in part because of their work in publications and in the arts, media, cinema, that sort of thing. And so that seemed to always be kind of a strain. It was really in the novitiate year with the Paulists that I created my first icon. I'll put that in somewhat quotes. It was of St. Paul. I was really kind of just looking at an icon I'd found there of St. Paul and duplicating it. And so that was really my first kind of experience, I think, with icons from a spiritual level. And when I was in school learning art history, we were presented with all of art history, but from a more historical perspective, not so much a religious or faith perspective. So we would study what we now call icons, but not nearly from the perspective that I gained later, particularly in the seminary, when I began to study more the theological, spiritual, and liturgical dimensions of what an icon is. And so the beginnings of that were in the novitiate year. And then during my seminary time, I focused more on that. Of course, not having a lot of time to do that because I was focusing on my studies, but did a paper on the Transfiguration, which some say in the Eastern Church, that's the first icon when you enter the seminary. I don't know how true this is, but this is the story, is that when you enter the seminary in some Eastern seminaries, the first thing that the students do is create an icon of the Transfiguration.
Oh.
And that's very much in keeping with Eastern theology and liturgy, which is the great line, which was, if you want to know what we believe, look at our icons. And so that really captivated me in terms of the icon as visual theology. And I began to see that that wasn't focused on as much in the Western tradition and in Western formation. And so I began very interested during my seminary years in pursuing that more.
Excellent. Just for those of our viewers who are from a faith other than Christianity, the Transfiguration is a moment in the Gospels where Jesus appears to three of his main disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he appears with the presence of Moses and Elijah to confirm the continuity of his teaching and his life in the realm of Judaism, and the connection with many of the Hebrew prophecies that he does eventually claim fully for himself.
Correct.
Yes. So it seems like your interest in religious art was quite early too. This wasn't like something that like hit you. You didn't fall to the ground like St. Paul and say, my art now is going to be dedicated to faith and religious iconography.
Yeah, I would say that there was interest early on in all forms of art, but religious was certainly part of it. We were a family of faith. My mom was a faithful Catholic. We went to mass every week, and she prayed. And my grandma lived with us, and she would pray several hours a day. She would set up her chair, and she would go through her prayers. And we had candles lit on our stove in the kitchen for various purposes. And so there was a visual kind of theology, an organic visual kind of devotional theology that was in our home. But I will say that the real interest in what I do now came about probably in the seminary years my college years, when I think I committed myself to my beliefs more strongly. And then certainly a sense of being called to, at the time, a thought to ordained priesthood that wasn't for me, but that's what I believed at the time. And then that helped me pursue what I consider to be my vocation, which is to be an iconographer. In the Eastern churches, an iconographer is a very specific vocation in the life of the church. It's basically a visual pastor or a visual theologian. So that really attracted me. And again, not the focus as much in my own Western tradition, but I thought that I would pursue that. And even to this day, I try to help increase that awareness in the work and ministry I do. I give talks to schools and churches on a fairly regular basis about the work I do. And one of the interests for me is to help anyone who's listening attends my talks that might be called to this, but doesn't really know that yet, to maybe spark some interest and to say, is this really what they're called to do? So in a certain sense, as an iconographer, for those unfamiliar with that, the term itself can be translated as an image writer. So icon being the Greek for image, and then ography would be writing, such as calligraphy or typography. So you can translate it as an image writer. And the idea there is that that images give us understanding of the world and of our faith and of God in the same ways that words do. They're different. It's a different language in that sense, but it can evoke the same kinds of reactions that words do. And in fact, there's a real connection between the two. If you look at some languages, such as particularly, I think today, of, say, some Asian languages such as Chinese, where the characters are really little pictures.
Yes.
What we might think of as a letter for them would be more of what we might think of as a tiny little picture. And so you can see the connection between the two. And so in iconography, we actually use the term a person writes an icon, because they can read it. They can span it over visually, make connections between symbols, and in a sense, understand what's being communicated through the image that way. So I found there to be a much greater link between the word and the image. And I also present that and teach that and try to encourage people to see that more than they might have before.
Wonderful. Just a aside here, you can see many of Nicholas's beautiful iconography and other work on his website. Again, I'll be posting that in the newsletter. And also, he does do these workshops and classes even, right? Sometimes there are classes. If you're interested, you're certainly welcome to contact him. Also, information on the website. What you were just saying made me think of the sort of the extension of iconography. And most of us have a lot of photographs of family and friends in our homes and in our offices. And it just occurred to me only while you were talking about it, for Christians. I mean, because there are a number of faiths that highlight art and pictures of the divine and the various divinity figures, but there's also religions that do not, particularly Judaism, Islam, overall, exceptions, of course, in history. But for the Christians, it's particularly, I just see the link between our family photographs and our faith in Christ, how God has become for us so fully human that there's a way of honoring the physical and the expression in art. It is perhaps, for Christians of all denominations, something that we take for granted. We're not making the connection between the divine, the images of Jesus, and the images of us who are baptized into Christ, called to be as Christ-like as humanly possible by the grace of God. And
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that, of course, as Christians, one of our fundamental beliefs is that God became human, took on human form in Jesus. So we would use the term, the Word became flesh. And so in that sense, we would hold that God's intimate expression to us finds its fullness in the Word of God becoming human, becoming flesh, becoming like us in all things, we would say, but sin. But the idea is that by being able to access God's life within us through the image, I think it's a profound interpreter for us of really what's going on and how intimate God is with us. And so that's very important, I think, for Christians. I think in the history of the church, you'll find that when there are moments in the life of the church where images are less focused upon, oftentimes there's a reaction in short time to that, and the church returns back to some kind of a focus on iconography again and imagery again, because there is this intimate link that without it there seems to be something not quite in place, I think, for a lot of Christians who understand that relationship.
Wonderful. Well, let's go to my final question. You're involved in a different type of religious art right now, something that it seems like it's a whole new adventure for you, and a new assignment that you have from one of the churches. Could you tell us about this new type? Well, it's new to me, and it's new to you, but not a new art form. What is the art form that's engaging you now, and what is your project?
Well, I'm primarily an iconographer, which means that I create images in what would be called the Byzantine tradition. Okay, so that has been the focus of my work up until recent years. But I've always been interested in a movement that occurred in Germany in mid-19th century. It's called Baronese art, or the Baronese school of art. And it's got the name because it originated in Baronne, or Baronne, and among the German Benedictine monks who lived there. And at that time in the life of the church, they had felt that some of the imagery in the life of the church had become a bit sentimental, or had become a bit romantic, and it lost its way a little bit in its ability to communicate, I think, the sobriety, the solemnness, and the seriousness of our faith. Oops. Oh, sorry.
Baronese, that's the name.
Baronese. Yeah, I think it's pronounced either Baronese or Baronne. There people pronounce it differently. I pronounce it Baronese, and I think that's what I've heard. Where I live here in Minnesota, not too far north of us is St. John's University, which is called Collegeville. It's the Benedictine monks that run the university there. And they have a lot of Baronese work that was there from the beginning when they founded that university. There's also a lot of Baronese work in Conception Abbey in Missouri. And so those are some of the locations in the United States where you can find this work. It came into a popularity. It started to take off. There were several monks who did a lot of research on trying to create it into a kind of a systematic form of creating the image. And it was very heavily influenced by the Romanesque tradition, the Byzantine tradition, but also Egyptian motifs, which was kind of something new. A lot of Christian forms of art had not been influenced very much by the Egyptian motifs that we see in those works. And so they felt very strongly that within some of that work was, of course, not a Christian faith, but a very spiritual people.
Yes.
And so they were able to access certain motifs and ways in which the Egyptian art communicated what would be called the liminal aspect of art. Liminal meaning a place between two worlds, kind of an intersection between the human, the divine, the natural, and the supernatural, earth and heaven. And so that became a form of art that was not uncommon, I think, in many areas of the Western world for quite a while. It went out of popularity. Not sure exactly when, maybe 30s or 40s. And then now today, it seems to be coming back of interest again. I think in part because after the Council of Vatican II, for those who aren't familiar, in the mid to late 60s, the Catholic Church called a large universal council to direct the needs of the church and trying to make the faith of the Catholic Church, the faith of Christ, more accessible to the world. And in doing that, they were sought to recover some ancient traditions and things that the church had maybe lost track of over time. And in doing that, some of the imagery that we had at the time, people felt really wasn't a fit anymore. And so we went through a period of time where we maybe didn't have a lot of imagery in the churches, a lot of sacred imagery, or we were experimenting with some new forms. And that's kind of evolved over the last 50, 60 years since the close of Vatican II to a place where people find within the Baronese form, many people, not all, but many people find within that form a nice balance between, again, the human and the divine. So you, in a Baronese image, you have a sense of the very human aspect of the individual depicted, a little more so than you might in, say, the Byzantine tradition, which is a bit stylized.
Yes.
But you also have the awareness of the spiritual in a very profound way. And so in that sense, I think it is meeting a need. I've had interest in it for a while. And fortunately, about a year and a half ago or so, I was contacted to do the imagery for the new college seminary, St. John Vianney College Seminary on the University of St. Thomas here in St. Paul.
Oh,
They've
right, in the city.
on that, yeah, they've been on that campus for a while, but they had funds raised for a new chapel and also offices and related kinds of rooms and so forth. The college seminary attracts about 100 young men from around the country who are, their bishops send them there as a way to obtain their undergraduate degrees while they're discerning ordained priesthood. And so they asked me to be the artist to do that. So I was involved for quite a long time, creating quite a number of images for them for their new chapel, which was just dedicated fairly recently. And that's all in the Baronese form, which you will have links to or images on, I believe, so people can see some.
Beautiful. Yes, they'll be featured with links beneath this this interview. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Nicolas. It's great to know about some new movements in art and iconography and of your work, and to introduce people to it. So I thank you so much for spending time with me, and I hope you'll look for the new issue of Together in Hope, which should be out in a couple of weeks, or probably early August.
Well,
God
thanks so much.
you, and best to all your family. I'm going to put this on stop the recording, but I think we can stay on for a minute or two. So thank you, everybody, and check out those links. All right, let's see. There's this. So here we are. Pause recording.